In the bustling streets of Lekki Phase 1, Lagos, three girls had been inseparable since their primary school days at Corona School. Aduni, Zainab, and Folashade were more than friends. They were sisters by choice, sharing secrets, dreams, and every milestone from their first day of school to their university graduation from the University of Lagos. They'd grown up in the same neighborhood. Their mothers were friends, and their fathers played tennis together at the Ikoyi Club every Saturday. But even in the tightest circles, there are those who shine brighter, and Aduni had always been that beacon. With her deep-set eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom, her infectious laugh that could light up any room, and a kindness that made strangers feel like old friends, she possessed something intangible that drew people to her like moths to a flame. As the years rolled by and they transitioned from awkward teenagers to sophisticated young women navigating Lagos's social scene, the differences between them became more pronounced. Wherever they went, whether it was Quilox nightclub in Victoria Island, Sunday brunch at NOK by Alara, or gallery openings at Terracolta, men would approach their table with the same pattern. They would compliment all three, calling them beautiful, stunning even, but their eyes would always return to Aduni. "Your friends are lovely," they would say, "but there's something different about you, a light." Zainab, tall and elegant with her perfectly laid Brazilian wave, would smile graciously. Folashade, curvy and fashionable with her designer bags and carefully curated Instagram aesthetic, would laugh it off. But inside, something was beginning to fester, especially in Folashade's heart. A seed of envy that watered itself with every compliment Adeni received, every head that turned when she walked by. Then, Aduni met Olumide, and everything changed. He was a successful tech entrepreneur who had made his millions before 30, the kind of man who flew to Dubai for weekend shopping trips and thought nothing of booking out entire restaurants for intimate dinners. He didn't just love Aduni, he worshipped her, showering her with gifts that made Zainab and Folashade's boyfriends look like they were playing in the minor leagues. The Hermes dags, the spontaneous trips to Mauritius and the Maldives, the diamond jewelry that caught the light at every angle. Olumide's generosity knew no bounds. What made it even remarkable was how he extended that generosity to Aduni's friends. When their lease was up on their shared flat in Yaba, Olumide paid for a stunning 3-bedroom apartment in Lekki Phase 1, insisting that Aduni's happiness depended on having her best friends close. "Your sisters shouldn't worry about rent," he'd said with a warm smile that seemed genuine. Zainab was grateful, but Folashade began to wonder what it would be like to be the one Olumide looked at with such devotion, to be the one wearing those gifts, to be the one who made a man that successful lose his composure. The envy that had been quietly growing in Folashade's chest finally found a companion in desperation. It started innocently enough, a lingering look when Olumide would pick up Aduni from their apartment, her fingers tracing the leather of the latest handbag he'd gifted, imagining what it would feel like to be chosen like that. Folashade had always been the practical one, the planner, the strategist who got things done while others dreamed. She'd built a modest following as a lifestyle influencer, but the brand deals were small, the money tight, and watching Aduni live a life of effortless luxury while she struggled to maintain appearances for Instagram was slowly driving her mad. One evening, after too many glasses of wine at their apartment while Aduni was away on yet another romantic getaway with Olumide, this time to Zanzibar, Folashade made a confession to Zainab that would change everything. "Sometimes I wish I was her," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Just for one day, to know what it feels like to be the special one." Zainab, who had her own quiet resentments but had always been better at hiding them, should have been the voice of reason. She should have reminded Folashade that Aduni's light wasn't something to be envied but celebrated, that their friend had never been anything but generous and kind to them both. But Zainab was tired too. Tired of being the tall, elegant friend who men approached only to ask about Aduni. Tired of watching her own relationship crumble while Aduni floated on clouds of romance. tired of feeling invisible. So instead of wisdom, she offered commiseration. And in that moment of shared bitterness, something dark was born. The conversation turned from wishing to wondering, from wondering to imagining, and from imagining to planning. It happened so gradually that neither could pinpoint exactly when they crossed the line from bitter friends venting to something far more sinister. By the time Aduni's birthday was circled on the calendar, her 27th, which Olumide had promised would be unforgettable, they had made a decision that would stain their souls forever. The plan was simple in its cruelty. They would celebrate Aduni's birthday at Quillock's, her favorite club, where Olumide had reserved the VIP section and invited half of Lagos's elite. In the chaos of celebration, the free-flowing champagne, the darkness punctuated by strobe lights, it would be easy to slip something into her drink, something Folashade had acquired through a connection she refused to name, even to Zainab. The substance was supposed to be undetectable, to mimic natural causes, perhaps a heart attack or an aneurysm. No one will suspect anything, Folashade had said, her voice cold and clinical, as if she were planning a business venture rather than murder. And when she's gone, Olumide will need comfort. He'll need someone who knew her, who loved her, who can keep her memory alive. Zainab had nodded, though somewhere deep inside a voice screamed that this was wrong, that they were crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. But she silenced that voice, drowned it in jealousy and years of feeling second best, and agreed to play her part. Neither of them slept well in the weeks leading up to that birthday, but neither backed down either, too proud or too far gone to admit they were contemplating the unthinkable. The night of Aduni's birthday arrived with an unusual heaviness in the Lagos air, the kind that precedes a storm that never quite breaks. Folashide and Zainab had spent the afternoon at the apartment, helping to prepare, though every smile felt like shattered glass in their mouths and every laugh rang hollow. They'd gotten ready together, as they always did. Zainab in a stunning emerald green dress that hugged her frame, Folashide in gold sequins that caught the light, both of them looking beautiful, but knowing they would still be eclipsed the moment Aduni appeared. When their birthday girl finally emerged from her room, both friends felt their resolve waver for just a moment. But something was immediately wrong. Aduni looked ethereal in her white birthday dress, diamonds at her throat, courtesy of Olumide, but her skin had a translucent quality, almost ghostly pale, and there was a fragility to her movements that hadn't been there before. Dark circles shadowed her eyes despite the carefully applied makeup, and when she smiled, it didn't quite reach those usually luminous eyes. "Aduni, are you okay? You look pale," Zainab said, and for a moment her concern was genuine, the old friendship breaking through the veneer of betrayal they'd constructed. Aduni waved her hand dismissively, though her fingers trembled slightly. "I'm fine, just didn't sleep well last night. Probably just excitement about tonight," she said. But her voice lacked its usual musical quality, sounding thin and reedy. Folashide and Zainab exchanged a glance, and in that look was a question neither wanted to answer. Should they still go through with it when she already looked so weak? But the moment passed, swallowed by months of planning and jealousy too deep to abandon now. They climbed into the Range Rover that Olumide had sent for them, and as they drove through Lagos traffic toward Victoria Island, Aduni leaned her head against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "This is going to be the best night," she whispered, though whether she was trying to convince them or herself, nobody could tell. Quillock's was already packed when they arrived, the bass thumping so hard you could feel it in your chest, colored lights painting the crowd in shades of purple and gold. Olumide had outdone himself. The VIP section was decorated with white roses and gold balloons, bottles of Ace of Spades champagne lined the table, and Lagos's beautiful people had turned out in force. When Aduni walked in, the DJ gave her a special shout-out, and for a moment she was her old self again, beaming and waving, the light that everyone always mentioned seeming to glow a bit brighter despite her pallor. Then came the moment they'd all been waiting for. Olumide took the microphone and the club fell silent. "Baby, I know you said you didn't want any big gifts this year," he said with that million-naira smile, "but I couldn't help myself." Outside, through the club's glass doors, Aduni could see it. A brand new Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon, white, with a massive red bow on top. Her name spelled out in rose petals on the hood. The club erupted in cheers and applause. Women screamed with vicarious excitement. Men clapped Olumide on the back, and Aduni's hands flew to her mouth in genuine shock. She turned to hug Folashide and Zainab, tears streaming down her face. And in that embrace, both friends felt the full weight of what they were about to do. But it was too late to turn back now. The poison was already in Folashide's purse, waiting for the right moment.
The celebration continued in full swing, but barely an hour after Olumide's grand gesture, Aduni's hand suddenly flew to her stomach. Her face, already pale, turned a sickly shade of grey, and she swayed on her feet, reaching out to grip the VIP section's railing for support. "I don't feel well," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the music. "Something's wrong." Olumide was at her side instantly, his arm around her waist, concern etched deep in his features. The festive atmosphere shattered like dropped crystal as Aduni's legs buckled beneath her. Zainab and Folashade rushed over, their faces masks of concern, though Folashade's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them behind her back. The poison was still in her purse. They hadn't even had a chance to use it. Whatever was happening to Aduni had nothing to do with their plan, and that realization sent ice through both their veins. Olumide didn't waste time. He scooped Aduni into his arms like she weighed nothing and started pushing through the crowd, shouting for people to clear the way. "Call an ambulance, now!" he roared, but he wasn't waiting. He was already carrying her toward the exit, toward his car, toward help. The drive to Reddington Hospital in Victoria Island was a blur of Lagos streets and panicked prayers. Zainab and Folashade had climbed into Olumide's Bentley without asking, unable to let their friend go alone, despite or perhaps because of what they'd planned to do to her. In the back seat, Aduni drifted in and out of consciousness, her breathing shallow and labored, her lips moving in silent words that nobody could decipher. At one point, as they waited at a traffic light that felt like it would never change, Folashade leaned close to Zainab and whispered, barely audible over Olumide's frantic phone calls to the hospital, "You don't think what we put in her drink earlier, you don't think it actually affected her, do you?" Zainab's head snapped toward her, eyes wide with confusion and horror. "We didn't put anything in her drink yet," she hissed back. "The stuff is still in your purse." They stared at each other, the awful truth settling over them. Whatever was killing their friend had nothing to do with them, but they had been ready, willing, and planning to do exactly this. The guilt was suffocating, made worse by the fact that they hadn't even earned it through action, only through intention. The emergency room at Reddington was controlled chaos. Doctors rushing, nurses calling out medical terms, machines beeping with urgent insistence. Olumide refused to leave Adoni's side until security physically held him back, and he stood beyond the emergency room doors like a sentinel, his expensive clothes rumpled, his face a mask of devastation. Folashade and Zainab sat in the waiting room, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of hospital and the low murmur of other people's tragedies, neither able to look at each other. Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Then, as dawn began to break over Lagos, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed obscenely beautiful given the circumstances, a doctor emerged. Her face told them everything before her words did. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice professionally gentle, but weighted with genuine sorrow. "We did everything we could, but her body just gave up. She's gone." The wail that came from somewhere deep in the building was Aduni's mother, and it was a sound that would haunt Folashade and Zainab for the rest of their lives. The sound of a mother's heart breaking. The sound of grief so profound it seemed to shake the very foundations of the hospital. The sound of consequences neither had anticipated when they'd started down this dark path.
The funeral was held at the Redeemed Christian Church of God on a grey Saturday morning that matched the collective mood of everyone who had known Aduni. Lagos society turned out in force. Socialites in black lace and designer sunglasses, tech entrepreneurs who'd known Olumide from the circuit, former classmates from Unilag, and countless others whose lives Aduni had touched with her characteristic warmth. The church was filled beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out onto the grounds, all there to mourn a light that had been extinguished far too soon. Folashade and Zainab sat in the front row as befitted Adoni's closest friends, dressed in matching black ashoebi, their faces carefully composed masks of grief. But while the tears that rolled down their cheeks were real, they were tears of guilt rather than pure sorrow. Guilt for what they'd planned, guilt for the hatred they'd harbored, guilt for the fact that even now, even at their friend's funeral, Folashade's eyes kept drifting to Olumide, calculating, planning, unable to let go of the twisted desire that had started all of this. In the weeks that followed, as Lagos moved on the way cities do, indifferent to individual tragedy in the face of millions of other stories, Folashade began her campaign. She started small, appearing at Olumide's office in Ikoyi with home-cooked meals, reminding him that Aduni would have wanted him to eat, to take care of himself. She'd show up at his favorite spots by coincidence, always perfectly made up, always ready with a story about Aduni that would make him smile through his tears. "I miss her too," she'd say, placing a hand on his arm that lingered just a moment too long. "But we have to keep living. She'd want that for us." Zainab watched this performance with growing unease. The reality of what they'd planned, what Folashade was still essentially doing, just through different means, finally breaking through her fog of jealousy. She tried to pull Folashade aside one evening to remind her that this was wrong, that they were supposed to be mourning their friend, not capitalizing on her death. But Folashade's eyes had taken on a feverish quality, obsessive and determined. "Don't pretend you're better than me," she'd snapped. "We both wanted this. I'm just brave enough to see it through." What Folashade didn't know was that Olumide was not the grief-stricken fool she took him for. He was a businessman who'd built an empire by reading people, by seeing through masks and identifying opportunities and threats. He'd noticed Folashade's circling immediately, recognized it for what it was, and felt a cold rage settle in his chest that was entirely unlike his usually warm demeanor. So he made a decision that was part strategy, part revenge, and part investigation. He began to return Folashade's attention, carefully and deliberately, letting her think her plan was working. He'd text her late at night, saying he couldn't sleep, that talking about Aduni helped. He'd invite her to dinners where he'd drink just enough to seem vulnerable, to seem like he was falling for her comfort. And Folashade, blinded by her obsession and her greed, never noticed that his smiles never quite reached his eyes, that he was always watching, always listening, always waiting for her to reveal the truth he suspected locked beneath her performance of grief. 3 months after Aduni's death, they were officially dating. Or at least that's what Folashade's Instagram post suggested. Carefully curated photos of them at restaurants, at art galleries, living the life she'd always envied Aduni for having. Before we continue, do tell me where you're watching from, and if you are from TikTok, the full story is already on YouTube. Enjoy! 6 months after Aduni's death, as Folashade's 27th birthday approached, Olumide began to play his final hand. He'd been patient, methodical, treating their relationship like a business deal that required perfect timing for maximum impact. He'd watched Folashade grow comfortable, confident even, posting photos of them together with captions about finding light after darkness and unexpected second chances. She'd moved into his penthouse in Banana Island, started wearing the jewelry he bought her. Never quite as extravagant as what he'd given Aduni, but she didn't seem to notice. Zainab had distanced herself completely, unable to watch her former friend parade around in what should have been Aduni's life, guilt eating her alive every time she saw them together. The final piece of Olumide's plan came together when he invited Folashade to an exclusive event at a private club in Ikoyi, champagne flowing freely, Lagos's elite in attendance, and most importantly, an atmosphere where secrets came loose with enough alcohol. He'd been plying her with drinks all night, expensive bottles that she consumed greedily, her inhibitions melting away with each glass. "I need to know something," Olumide had said, his voice low and intimate, as they sat in a private corner, away from prying eyes, but well within range of the phone he'd positioned carefully on the table, recording everything. About Aduni, about that night. Folashade, drunk and feeling invincible in her victory, had laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "What about it?" she'd asked, her words slurring slightly. Olumide leaned closer, his hand covering hers, his eyes intense. "I've been having nightmares about how sudden it was. The doctor said her body just gave up, but some things never felt right. You were there. You were her best friend. Did you ever notice anything strange? And maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the 6 months of carrying a secret that had grown too heavy, or maybe it was the twisted need to confess that lives in every guilty conscience." But Folashade started talking. At first in hints and implications, then in full, horrifying detail about the jealousy, about the planning, about the poison they'd bought but never used because Iduni had collapsed before they could. "It's funny, isn't it?" she'd said, tears streaming down her face now, mascara running in black rivers. "We planned to kill her, but God did it for us, saved us the trouble, saved us from becoming murderers, even though we already were in our hearts." The recording sat on Olumide's phone like a loaded gun, but he wasn't done yet. He wanted Folashade to feel what Aduni must have felt, not the physical pain of death, but the emotional devastation of betrayal, the horror of realizing the people you trusted most wanted you gone. So he played along for 2 more weeks, until Folashade's birthday arrived. She'd been dropping hints for weeks about wanting a car, specifically a G-Wagon like the one Aduni had received. On the morning of her birthday, Olumide told her he had a surprise and to meet him at a warehouse he owned in Akbakwa. She'd arrived dressed in white, a mirror of Aduni's last birthday outfit, expecting to see a car with a bow. Instead, she found the warehouse empty, except for Olumide, Zainab, who he'd summoned with a cryptic message, several police officers, and in the center of the space, standing alive and whole and very much not dead, was Aduni. The woman who had died, whose funeral they'd attended, whose mother had wailed in the hospital, was standing there with a small, sad smile on her face. "Surprised?" Olumide asked, his voice cold as ice. Folashade's scream echoed off the warehouse walls, her hands flying to her mouth, her body stumbling backward as if she'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. Zainab collapsed to her knees, sobbing, unable to process what she was seeing. Aduni stepped forward, and in the harsh warehouse light, they could see she looked healthier than she had in months. The color returned to her cheeks, the light back in her eyes. "I had a twin sister," Aduni said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Ayomide. We were identical in every way, except that she was sick, had been since birth. The doctors gave her 1 day to live, maybe 2 at most, around the time of my birthday. She'd always wanted to experience a real birthday celebration, to feel special for once in her short life. So we switched places. I stayed in the hospital with my mother, and she went to the club, wore my dress, received my gift, felt my boyfriend's love, experienced my friend's affection." The pause that followed was suffocating. She died happy, thinking she was me, thinking she'd lived a beautiful life, even if just for a few hours. "But you too," And here Aduni's voice broke. You two were planning to take that from her, from me, from someone you called sister. Olumide stepped forward, pulling out his phone and pressing play on the recording. Folashade's drunken confession filled the warehouse, every word a nail in her coffin. The police have been very interested in this recording, Olumide said. Conspiracy to commit murder carries a life sentence in Nigeria. The fact that you didn't succeed because your intended victim's twin died of natural causes first doesn't absolve you of the crime you planned, the poison you purchased, the intent you harbored. Folashade tried to run, but the police were already moving, handcuffs clicking into place around her wrists. She screamed, begged, claimed it was all a joke, that she'd been drunk and saying crazy things. But the evidence was damning. Text messages between her and Zainab that Olumide's private investigator had uncovered, financial records of the poison purchase, witness statements from people who'd heard them making cryptic comments in the weeks before the birthday. Zainab, who had begun confessing everything through her sobs the moment she saw Aduni alive, would receive a lighter sentence for her cooperation, but both women's lives, as they knew them, were over. As the police led Folashade away, she looked back at Aduni one final time, and the birthday girl who had always shone so bright simply shook her head, her expression a mixture of pity and profound sadness. In the weeks that followed, Lagos society would buzz with the scandal, the twin switch, the murder plot, the elaborate revenge orchestrated by a tech millionaire who loved his girlfriend enough to ensure justice for a crime that was never technically committed. Aduni would struggle with the weight of knowing that her closest friends, her sisters by choice, had hated her enough to want her dead. She would attend therapy, process the trauma, and eventually learn to trust again, though more carefully this time. Olumide proposed 3 months later on a quiet beach in Seychelles with no audience but the waves and the stars. And she said yes, because she'd learned that real love doesn't dim your light, it protects it fiercely. And sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, Aduni would think about Ayomide, her twin, who died wearing her life like a borrowed dress, who'd experienced love and celebration and joy in her final hours, who'd never known that the friends surrounding her had poison in their hearts, if not yet in her drink. She'd whisper prayers for her sister's soul, for the friends who'd betrayed her, and for herself, that she'd never lose the light that had caused so much love and so much hatred, and that she'd use it more wisely going forward, surrounding herself only with people who celebrated her shine rather than plotting to extinguish it forever. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you never get such friends in life.